Russian President Vladimir Putin has addressed the accusations lodged against it by the United States in regard to a possible invasion into Ukraine. This is an ongoing escalation in tensions. It's been happening for weeks now, and unfortunately, it appears that the United States, in some instances, might be exaggerating the threat. That's according to Ukrainian officials. Now, let me give you the details on what Putin said during his joint press conference with the leader of Hungary. Putin, speaking in Moscow in a news conference with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, said the Kremlin was studying US and NATO replies to recent Kremlin proposals seeking to check NATO military activity in the region. But it is already clear, says Putin, that Russia's fundamental concerns have been ignored. NATO refers to the right of countries to choose freely, but you cannot strengthen someone's security at the expense of others. And what he's referring to is the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. That has been a red line for Putin, and he's been vocal about that for quite some time now. And it's because of the fact that Russia shares a border with Ukraine, a 1,300-mile long border. And when you consider this in the context of Ukraine receiving billions of dollars of weaponry from the United States, you can understand why Russia is concerned about a potential security threat for them. At the same time, the United States continues to say that the potential invasion of Russia into Ukraine is imminent, even though not just one, but several Ukrainian officials have countered that. They claim that is not true. They believe that that is leading to an escalation that's unnecessary. It's leading to panic that's unnecessary. And I'll give you more details into that in just a second. I just want to be clear that while the United States continues to note that there are as many as 100,000 Russian troops at their border with Ukraine, there are as many as 320,000 American troops in Europe who have remained there even after the Soviet bloc collapsed. So Russia sees that as provocative, Russia sees that as a threat, and as I mentioned earlier, Russia sees Ukraine joining NATO as a threat. Now, US officials have said that the West did not bow to Russia's demand that NATO end its open door policy and bar countries such as Ukraine and Georgia from joining the military alliance. And I also want to note that NATO has expanded from 16 countries during the collapse of the Soviet Union to 30 members. And the whole point of NATO was to check Russia. So that's why Russia sees NATO as a threat. That's why Russia sees Ukraine joining NATO as a provocative move and something that puts their security in jeopardy. And Russia, for its part, claims that it has no intention to invade Ukraine. I mean, obviously, I take what they say with a grain of salt, but you do have to see this situation as incentives and disincentives. There are a lot of disincentives, a lot of deterrents already in place to prevent Russia from invading Ukraine. Cenk.
Okay, so I'm gonna solve this in a little bit.
He's gonna solve it.
Okay, so good news for everybody, okay? But first, we've got some strange bedfellows here. So I am not a big fan of Vladimir Putin, to say the least. I might even be slightly famous for that. Viktor Orban is a terrible guy. He's pretty much a fascist in Hungary, but Hungary's part of NATO.
Yep.
So he probably shouldn't be there at all with Russia, and he's obviously reaching out as someone who's incredibly right-wing and proto-fascist to a fellow proto-fascist and right-winger in Putin. So already we've got a strange situation there. And then Tucker Carlson just last night not only attacked Republican senators that were warmongering against Russia, but I give him credit on this one. Not a guy I give credit to very often. He called out their defense contractor donors. Okay, that's real and that's true. And so he called out Lockheed Martin and others for contributing to Republican senators who now all of a sudden see Russia as a big, big threat.
Can I add something very quickly to that, Cenk? Just last week, on Friday actually, we covered a call that Raytheon executives had with their shareholders, and they were specifically talking about escalating tensions with Russia and how they plan to profit off of it. So we have to, again, think about the incentives and disincentives at play here. Continue.
Yeah, now, so nonetheless, I think that America is on questionable grounds here, and I think that Putin has an interesting point to make. Now, that is not something I say very often at all, almost never. And the reason is, how can you tell? Well, as Anna pointed out, the Ukrainians are telling us, whoa, cool it. We don't think it's as big a threat as you guys are hyping it up to be. Now, when the Ukrainians, who would be the ones in mortal danger, are telling us that they are not in mortal danger and that we're overhyping the threat, well, that gives you some pretty significant evidence, if not extraordinary evidence, of who's closer to being right here. And so now, again, that doesn't mean that it's not nuanced. I'll get into some more of that nuance in a second and solve it again as well. But you can tell there, we seem to be hyping it up in a way that is weird. So we'll come back to that in a second, yes.
So just to buttress your point and add some evidence to that, because it's one thing to say, Ukrainian officials don't want an escalation, they think this is exaggerated. Let's hear from a sociologist based in Ukraine. He spoke to Democracy Now! Just this morning about what Ukrainian intelligence is indicating in regard to a possible imminent threat from Russia. Let's watch.
Zelensky, but not only Zelensky, the Minister of Defense, the Secretary of the National Security Council, they all tell that according to Ukrainian data, according to Ukrainian intelligence, they don't see the massive invasion to Ukraine with occupation of the large territory of the big cities as likely, not only in the coming weeks, but maybe like in this year at least. So that's what the Ukrainian intelligence says.
And apologies, quick clarification, he's not based in Ukraine, he's in Dresden, Germany, but he's talking about what intelligence is saying on the ground in Ukraine. And this has been an ongoing issue. Biden had a call with Vladimir Zelensky just last week. It was a contentious call, it was a combative call, that's how it's being reported, because they disagree on how imminent this threat really is. Biden claims it is an imminent threat, whereas Ukraine claims no, that is not the case. And by exaggerating this threat, it is actually leading to a larger possibility of war.
Yeah, so it's not that Russian aggression hasn't happened before. It has, very significantly so, including in Crimea, which was in Ukraine. So unlike the anti-imperialist fake left in America that is only concerned about American imperialism, I'm concerned about American imperialism and Russian and Chinese and any other authoritarian right-wing government in the world. But in this case, when the Ukrainians are saying, we are not under threat, I don't know why you guys are saying this, that is a big, giant, flashing sign saying America's the one that's creating this problem, not Russia. It doesn't mean that he won't do it, he can't do it. He has amassed troops, apparently. And although now I even question the veracity of that, given what Ukrainian intelligence is saying. But if they're not concerned, that's a pretty good sign we shouldn't be concerned. So there's something weird going on here from the American side. In terms of how to solve it, look, Anna's right. Russia has legitimate concerns. Just because they're not us doesn't mean they don't have legitimate concerns. And just because they're wrong on many things doesn't mean they're not right on some things. So, and Russia is not wrong on anything. The current Russian government has been wrong many times because it's authoritarian. But do they have legitimate security concerns about us parking missiles all over their borders? Of course they do. Of course, Anna's right that we wouldn't stand for it if the Russians did it to us. In fact, that's not in dispute. That's what the Cuban Missile Crisis was about. When the Russians moved missiles into Cuba, we threatened world-ending nuclear war. So amassing troops on the border would have been the least of what we would have done if we were in Russia's situation. You just have to be honest about that. It's not that hard to be honest. And now it looks like American media is beginning to catch on to that.
Yes.
So would you like me to solve it now?
Well, before you solve it, just one other thing I want the audience to take into consideration. Remember, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the United States was attempting to convince Americans that Russia was paying bounties to the Taliban for American soldiers in Afghanistan. And then that story turned out to be garbage. The Washington Post, all of a sudden they have to backtrack and retract the original reporting on that because that did not end up being true. So you have to take the situation, you have to, of course, be skeptical of the claims coming from both sides, but that, in my mind, is a clear example of the United States attempting to escalate tensions with Russia by accusing it of doing something that it was not actually doing. Doesn't mean that the Russian government is completely innocent, doesn't mean that we like Vladimir Putin, but it does mean that we want to be cautious in moving forward with any type of escalation toward war. And that's what I'm seeing from the Biden administration right now. It's pretty terrifying.
Yeah, so look, my fix here is relatively easy, so I don't want too much credit for it. So look, you usually resolve these in a simple way. Are we right to expand NATO all the way to Russia's borders on nearly every side? If we truly want peace and deterrence, that's probably less productive. It'll make us less safe, not more safe, if we put those missiles right on Russia's borders. So I don't think it's that productive to expand NATO that way. On the other hand, we're not gonna wanna lose face and walk backwards, especially Biden, who's trying to prove that he's a tough guy in domestic politics. He's completely failed. So now he's going around saying, oh yeah, I'll push Russia around. So he can't say, no, we will withdraw putting NATO into Ukraine as a request or anything along those lines. But what they can do is say, okay, we have reconsidered the timing with which we will deal with Ukraine applying to NATO, okay? And behind the scenes, you tell the Russian diplomats, okay, we're not gonna do it. We're not gonna do it for X number of years, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Publicly, we're saying we're still open to it. Every country has the freedom to choose NATO and to choose their alliances, but we will back away diplomatically for X number of years. Problem solved. The Russians would be at ease. They would be unlikely to invade in that scenario. We lose nothing. In fact, we're probably a little bit safer if we do that than if we expand NATO, which would be seen as provocative. So that's the reasonable, relatively easy way to solve this. But the question is, does either side, particularly America in this case, want an easy resolution, or do they want some sort of mess for some other reason that is not clear at this point?
Right, I mean, this could be an attempt at engaging in some sort of Cold War to sell weaponry. There's that possibility as well, but you're playing with fire because you're dealing with two nuclear countries. So if this is just an attempt to bolster the defense industry, it's pretty sick, right? And incredibly risky. And one of our viewers wrote in and says, why would Russia be worried about Ukraine joining NATO? There's no threat to Russia from Ukraine. They're the ones who invade and annex territory. Well, I would argue if there was an international alliance that was providing weaponry to Mexico, specifically in regard to the United States, would we see that as a threat? And that's what's happening here. The United States government over the past, since 2014, has provided literally billions of dollars worth of weaponry to Ukraine. And I think that we need to be real about how any country would perceive that, especially when they share a border with the country, receiving the weaponry from a country that is hostile to it, like the United States, Yeah,
and so in fact, Putin asked in his press conference today, so if we have a conflict with Ukraine in Crimea, which Russia now currently controls, but Ukraine has claim to, he said, am I now in the middle of a war with the rest of Europe and America? Well, if Ukraine's in NATO, yes, technically we would be at war with Russia, and that is a very, very dangerous situation. You don't have to lose face if you're the one who needlessly started the conflict in the first place. Back away, back away. I'm ready to be super aggressive with Russia, diplomatically, financially, you name it, in the appropriate circumstance. But this doesn't look like it's anywhere near appropriate. So I don't know what the hell we're thinking. And guys, last thing is that it's so hard to tell America's intentions because our officials are bribed by so many different interests that it's hard to keep up. Could it be that there's some giant hedge fund or several hedge funds that have bet one way or another on the Ukrainian economy or the Russian economy, and they are funneling millions of dollars to Democrats and Republicans? Yeah, that's totally possible. Look, in this case, I have no evidence of that, but I'm just giving it to you as an outlandish case that is not at all outlandish. Could it be the defense contractors? Could it be the oil companies? And they think it'll drive up prices. Anything is possible. In fact, a foreign government could be doing it. How? They just give money to our politicians. It's so easy to buy them. For the foreign governments, you need a tiny bit of loophole, but we explained that yesterday. Democratic majority for Israel right now is trying to buy 15 different seats, and they say, yeah, it's for Israel. It's not for America. We want to buy it for Israel. And that's just American politicians that they buy. So could somebody be buying a war with Russia? I don't know. Bribery is legal in America, so anything's possible.
So we'll keep filling you in. And look, if our analysis ends up being wrong, we'll be the first to come on the show and tell you, oops, we were wrong and we apologize. But this is the way that I'm reading the story and analyzing the story as someone who has no dog in the fight. I don't have any love for the US government and its warmongering ways. Same with Vladimir Putin. He's not innocent either. But you got to look at the facts on the ground. And more importantly, I'm gonna go with what Ukrainian intelligence is saying. I would argue that's incredibly important.
No, and I want to be clear, we're not wrong. It might turn out that Russia does take action at some future point, but that doesn't change the facts on the ground today. And today, Ukraine is saying, America, back away. When if they were about to get invaded, they'd be in a panic saying, give us weapons, give us a way to defend ourselves. They're asking Europe to back away. So the facts now are relatively clear. They could change later, but right now it doesn't look like Russia's the aggressor. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.